Something else we've been focusing on too is what we've termed biopriority. So biopriority is just a term that we created for our products that we, if I could use the wording, are more environmentally friendly. So the products that have the Belgium leaf next to them are those products. And also biopriority programs. So utilizing these biopriority products to try to reduce the amount of active ingredient load in some of these programs. So just, more to come on biopriority. All right. So let me get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation now and talk about fungicide phytomobility. What exactly is phytomobility? It's really just a big word to describe how do fungicides move around once they're inside the plant. Okay, so for some of you, this might be a bit of review, but this might be new material for some listening today. So typically when we talk about fungicide phytomobility, there are two types. So your contact fungicides and your penetrant fungicides. So your contact fungicides generally have a multi-site mode of action. And because of that, in terms of a resistance risk, they're deemed being low risk. So probably the most notable example of a multi-site fungicide would be chlorothalonil. Then you have your penetrant fungicides. And these have a single site mode of action, meaning they will stop the pathogen growth at one single biological site or biochemical site, within that fungus. And because of that, they're deemed medium to high risk in terms of developing resistance. So we have three different types of these penetrant fungicides, what's known as acropedal penetrants. So examples would be fluoxystrobin and thiophanate methyl. Your local penetrants, such as isofetamide, cyclophosphamide, and your systemic penetrants, or what some other people might refer to as the true systemics, Fosrol Pro and Facetyl-Al. Okay, so what we're looking at here right now is just a vertical cross section of a leaf blade. You got your xylem, your phloem, and then you have the margins of the leaf blade here, the waxy cuticle. Now let's take an example of a contact fungicide. Okay, you sprayed your fungicide, the deposit leaves the nozzle, and it comes into contact with the leaf. And where it comes into, you get a little bit of redistribution around that fungicide deposit. And when you have some germinating spores, and when it comes into contact, that's when you're getting control of your pathogen. But very important, just a couple things to note when you're using a contact fungicide, important to apply after the dew is removed. So the University of Maryland years ago did research just quantifying how much water was actually in dew. And it obviously depends if you have a light or heavy dew, but between 2 to 6 gallons per thousand of water. That's what they quantified dew as being. So if you're spraying contact fungicide in the dew, what happens is, well, there's two potential things that can happen. One, the fungicide deposit can roll off the leaf blade. So then you're not getting that contact with the germinating spore, or you get a dilution effect. So too much water and the fungicide deposit is no longer concentrated. So you really want to maximize your contact, your coverage. The more of these deposits you can have, the more of a chance it lands close to one of these germinating spores and get control. And especially for chlorothalonil, contact fungicides bind very highly to thatch in organic matter. So for that reason there, you can't use a contact fungicide for any kind of root-borne pathogen. No matter how much you try to water them in, they will not pass that thatch and that thatch layer there. So only foliar diseases can be controlled with a contact fungicide. However, okay, now let's take a look at this example here. What happens if you come into the golf course one morning and you see, whoa, I have some active disease? If you have some active disease, that means that pathogen has made its way into the plant and you're seeing some internal mycelium growing here. We all know that a contact fungicide can't make its way in to control that pathogen. So the example I like to use is an example I heard Dr. Vargas say years ago, where a patient or a person's not feeling well, goes to the doctor's office, and then the doctor looks him over, and so the patient's complaining of chest pain. The doctor looks him over and diagnoses him with pneumonia. So the patient grabs his medication and he goes home. So when he goes home, he opens that bottle of medication, puts it in his hand, he crushes it, then he rubs the medication on his chest. Clearly, that's not going to take care of your pneumonia. You have to reach for a medicine that'll go inside. So in this case here, if you have some active disease, you need a systemic fungicide. Now let's look at the acropedal penetrants. These fungicides, once they've left the nozzle, they come into contact with the leaf blade here. They have a high affinity to the water gradient inside that plant. So as this fungicide starts to make its way into the plant, it travels in between cells and it's making its way towards the xylem so it can make its way to the tip of the leaf blade. But it's important to note, as it's making its way to that xylem, where and when it's coming into contact with that pathogen, that's when you're getting control. These acropedal fungicides actually can enter the plant at 3 different areas, so the leaf, the crown, or you can actually use these types of fungicides as a soil drench. So examples of an acropedal would be a Disarm or a Renovo. So I have notes down here. So these acropedal fungicides are sometimes referred to as being, the xylem mobile, again, because they make their way up through the xylem. A lot of research has been done, definitely no on dollar spot. In terms of whether it is dew or not, dew does not affect efficacy or performance of these fungicides because, let's say you were to spray and the droplet comes into contact with some dew and it rolls off, even if the fungicide settles in at the crown area, or let's say it made its way into the soil, the roots can pick it up and the crown can also pick it up. And then these acropedal fungicides can be used for those root-borne pathogens since they can get taken up by the roots. So you can leave the dew if you want. That morning dew represents 2 to 6 gallons of water. So it can help you drive that product a little further down to your target. So that helps. So your local penetrant fungicides, these are fungicides that once they've left that spray tip and they come into contact with the plant, they have a high affinity to that waxy cuticle. So some of that fungicide starts to diffuse into the plant, traveling again through, not through, but between cells. And they are making their way across that margin towards the waxy cuticle on the other side. So have you ever heard the term having a translaminar effect? That's where it comes from. That fungicide is going side to side here. And again, as that fungicide is making its way across that leaf blade, when it's coming into contact with that mycelium that's inside, that's when you're getting control. So obviously you'd want to maximize coverage. The more of these droplets you have, the more of this translaminar effect you have, and the more potential areas or opportunities that fungicide has to come into contact with that mycelium. So those acropedal fungicides, if there is a test at the end of the seminar or questions that need to be answered, those acropedal fungicides are the only ones that move up through the xylem. These local penetrants do not. Okay. However, that being said, you can use these local penetrants as a soil applied fungicide. They will not move up in the plant, but some of them, for example, like Segue on your Pythium root rot or root dysfunction, which is a soil pathogen, a root pathogen, highly, highly efficacious. And in this case too, you can leave the dew. That'll help just to drive that product down even further. Now your systemic penetrants, or some people refer to them to as a true systemic. These are fungicides that, once they hit the leaf blade, they make their way what's known as symplastically, so through cells. So coming through cells, and they go up in the xylem and up and down in the phloem to new growth in that plant. And again, as it's making its way across to the xylem and phloem, when it's coming into contact with that pathogen inside the plant, that's where you're getting control. So an example of this type of product would be Phosphorol Pro. So they are xylem and phloem mobile. Examples, like I mentioned, Phosphorol Pro and even Aliette can do that. So these systemics, because they do move up or move down, you can either leave them on the leaf and they'll get in the plant and move down to the root, or you can water them in and they'll move up. Okay, now I really like to show this picture because it's a great way of illustrating fungicide phytomobility. So what you're looking at here are leaf blades. So this is all wheat, and here's your control up top. And these 4 here have been treated with fungicides, and they're all from the same, actually, these 3 are all from the same group. They're all strobilurins. They all belong to the group 11. But if you look at the difference between azoxystrobin and trifloxystrobin, so azoxystrobin is that acropedal penetrant. So in this area here is the only area where the fungicide was applied. It was then, the leaves were then inoculated with powdery mildew. So you can see the difference between an acropedal penetrant fungicide just put here, you got protection all the way to the leaf tip, versus a local penetrant applied just here but it didn't make its way to the leaf tip. You had a little bit of what's known as a redistribution or vapor phase, where you get a little redistribution on either side of that application area. So just a great way, great picture to show the difference between an active peel and a local. Not to say that trifloxystrobin is better or worse than azoxystrobin in terms of its phytomobility, but just different, that's all. So if you want more information on fungicide phytomobility, I really can't recommend this book enough. Or if you're interested in fungicides in a turf grass setting, this has quickly become my favorite book in my turf collection. I highly, highly recommend it. So all the pictures you just saw there come from this book. Very good resource. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a step back here and take a look at where do we stand now, like a bird's eye view of fungicides in Canada of 2021. Now, when I do this seminar seminar in live setting, when I ask this question, how many registered turf fungicides do we have in Canada? So if we're going to have there is a test again at the end of this webinar, might be worth paying attention right now, but how many registered turf fungicides are there? The typical answer I get is 20 to 25. There's actually 40 this year. So there's more fungicides available to us in Canada than we tend to think. But now, how many different active ingredients do we have? And that's a completely different question. The answer to that is actually 28. So we have 28 different active ingredients. Now, if I were to ask you how many different fungicide groups do we have? Again, a completely different question. The answer to that is actually 14. So you see the trend. We start with 40, went to 28, and we have 14. So we have 14 different fungicide groups in Canada. But of those 14, how many of them are actually commonly used? Every year, how many of these groups are we actually accessing? And when I look at it, I would say it's 9, especially for Western Canada, 9 commonly used fungicide groups. And here they are. And I'm not going to go through every one. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. However, just a couple things to take note of here. So this group M5, the chloronitrol group, so your chlorothalonil group, I highlighted in red just because unfortunately we do have restrictions on this now. It can only be used twice in season and once as a snow mold application. Look at this group here, your methylbenzimidazole carbamates. There's only one fungicide registered in that group. This is the group that we're going to lose. Group 2, your dicarboxamide group, is the group we're going to lose. Okay. But something too, I just mentioned there's 40 fungicides in Canada. If we look at this group 3, the DMIs, we have 10. Our QOIs, the strobilurins, group 11s, we have 9. So 10 plus 9 is 19, but let's call it 20 for easy math. So 50% of our fungicides belong in these two groups. Okay, so that's a lot. So unfortunately, though, come June of this year, like I mentioned, this group 2 is the group we're going to lose. And it's a shame. It's a great group. But you might think, okay, well, there's still a lot of fungicides, a lot of groups on the board here. What's the big deal? Well, let's go back to that scenario where you come in the morning, you have some active disease. That means that your pathogens aren't in the plant. You can't use a contact fungicide. If you want to stop, if your patient's sick and you want to get medicine in there as soon as possible, you need to reach for a systemic product. Now, when we look at that list now, taking out the contacts, it looks a little bit different. It's 5 groups left. This group down here, the group 33 is the phosphonates, Fosrol Pro and Signature Extra, fantastic fungicides, okay? However, they're probably better used preventatively than curatively. And they do sometimes get recommended curatively, but it's typically in combination with another group, fungicide group. So what I'm really saying is, there's really going to be just 4 systemic groups left. So what's a better way to kind of illustrate my point? Now you have to understand how much it pained me to put this slide up here, especially since you guys beat my team last night. And not just that, I know that we were in the running for Pierre-Luc Dubois, which I was hoping we were going to get to help strengthen our center ice position. But anyway, and I chose this logo because I think it's the nicest. Wanted to go retro this morning. But if I pick up, if I look, at some stats from one of a recent game, okay, I look at your centermen, your 4 centermen. I only need to have a passing knowledge of who your centermen are to figure out who's your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. clearly Mark Scheifele, you look at your time on ice, clearly Mark Scheifele is your number one centerman. Dubois, I mean, he comes from the best place on earth, Quebec. So, clearly he's going to be your second centerman here. You got Adam Lowry's your third, and you got Nate Thompson who's your fourth. So let's say, it's a third period, you're down a goal. You want to rotate it through your four centermen. You got to throw Nate Thompson out there 8 to 10 minutes a game to keep these two guys, especially, keep them fresh. Because if you need a tying goal at the end of that third period, you want these guys, your workhorses, to be fresh. Same thing here. You got your four centermen, and you probably have in your mind your first, second, and third centerman, but very important to throw out your fourth centerman, 8 to 10 minutes a game. Okay. So we talk about these fungicide groups, how are they actually classified? So these fungicide groups are classified based upon their cellular target in the fungus. And there's essentially 6 basic cellular targets in that fungus. And when we rotate through our fungicides, we're just shutting down that pathogen at different sites. So whether you're preventing microtubule development, or shutting down energy here in the mitochondria, shutting down cell wall formation, or cell membrane, or even nucleic acid here. So that's what we talk about, those fungicide groups. Basically, they are classified based upon their cellular target or their biochemical target within that pathogen. Okay, so if I could just use going to the movie theater in terms of just describing what my presentation has been like. So far, it's just been G-rated. Now we're going to take a look at some R-rated slides here. All right. So for those of you who are faint of heart, you might need to look away. But let's take a look at fungicide resistance. Does it actually exist? We talk about it. We roll our eyes. Is this something we really need to worry about? But yes, it does, in fact, exist. Here we have culture plates here, dollar spot. And these culture plates on top are dollar spot that are not resistant, meaning sensitive. And down here, we have dollar spot that is resistant. Here are your controls on the left-hand side, and you can see the difference. So these culture plates have been amended with different concentrations of propiconazole. So you can just see here how you have some resistance here down on the bottom. So even at 1 part per million, you're still getting some some fungus growth within that culture plate. So yes, it does exist. Then there's something known as cross resistance. So what we're looking at here, these 4 culture plates, here's your check, and you have 3 fungicides from the same family. These are all group 3s or DMIs. Here's myclobutanil, here's propiconazole, and here's triadenophan, which is only available south of the border. So let's say, for example, for whatever reason, at your golf course, you really love propiconazole, and that's all you ever really wanted to use, and you didn't rotate. Well, over time, one day will come where you get resistant, and it no longer works for you. All right, big deal. Now my second favorite fungicide is myclobutanil. Let me use that. Well, unfortunately, if you were to switch to myclobutanil, it's not going to work for you. Neither is triadenophan. So cross resistance is when you burn essentially a complete chemical class or fungicide group. Now, looking at what's known as multiple resistance. Again, on the top here, we have some dollar spot that is not resistant or sensitive. And down here, we have resistant. And here's your checks. So here, these culture plates were amended with iprodion and propiconazole. Here, thiophanate methyl and propiconazole. Here, iprodion, thiophanate methyl. And here's iprodion, thiophanate methyl, and propiconazole. You can see in each culture plate, you have some breakthrough. Even here, you've thrown 3 active ingredients, and you're still having a little breakthrough there. So if there ever was like a fungicidal equivalent of nightmare on wheels, this would be that scenario down here. When you get the call from the lab and you're diagnosed, you're with some multiple resistance on the golf course. This is when you get home, you look at your spouse in the eye and you're like, honey, pack your bags. We're going to a different golf course because you don't want to deal with this mess. So important to rotate. Now, what's also important to keep in mind is how resistant, you have 2 different resistance models. Okay. You have what's known as qualitative resistance and quantitative resistance. The qualitative resistance are exhibited by your QOIs, so your strobies, and benzimidazoles, thiophanate methyl. So the way this type of resistance works is you have a population, okay, a pathogen population that is not resistant. And over time, by not properly rotating or stewarding, that population becomes resistant. So it's really like if you can imagine a light bulb tied to a switch, flick that switch, overnight you're resistant. It can happen pretty fast, actually. And things to remember is you can double, triple your rates. You're not getting control back. You can shorten your interval. You're not getting control back. And what happens is that, it's like now you're spraying water. You can test to see if you're resistant to these types of fungicides, because when you spray, it's like spraying water. Generally speaking, there's few exceptions, but generally speaking, it's like spraying water. And you could discontinue use of these fungicide groups for 10, 15 years and reintroduce them later, and it still will not work for you. So important to steward these, especially now having lost that group too. Compared to your DMI fungicides, it's more of a slower transition, okay? And you never fully you don't get full resistance. It's more like a dimmer switch again. So if you can imagine that light bulb tied to a dimmer switch, just over time, just start to crank down that dimmer switch, that light bulb gets dimmer and dimmer. However, in this case here, you can shorten the interval of control or double your rate, and you start to get that control back. So very important to know this. So I'd like to throw this up too. It just shows you the fungicide risk, okay, or the risk of developing resistance when we factor in biological risk and chemical risk. So here are your diseases, and they're categorized based upon the populations that they form. So down here, your summer patch, take-all patch, they're deemed low resistance because in terms of a pathogen population that they will form, it tends to be generally low. So in a low population, there's less of an opportunity for a naturally occurring resistant isolate to form within that population, as compared to anthracnose and dollar spot and microdochium patch, which I know are diseases of significance in Manitoba. These are either high mycelium producers or high spore producers. So high populations. High populations equal higher chance of a naturally occurring isolate to form within that population. So if we look here, and then down here, your fungicides, and they're broken down into 3 categories. So your contacts are deemed low risk, and your single site, so here would be high risk. Your dicarboxamides, these are the ones we're going to lose. DMIs, group 3. QOIs, group 11, thiophonate methyl, group 1. So if we look, anthracnose, dollar spot, microdochium patch, on these diseases, a 12 out of 12. And now with the loss of this dicarboxamide, it puts more pressure on these 3 here. So hence why it's important to rotate. Now, let's say your 2 biggest issues in your golf course are summer patch and microdochium patch. Excuse me, summer patch and anthracnose. So you're going out, you're making that application on summer patch when your root zone temperature is around 18 degrees. And you want to use, let's say, a QOI. So summer patch with a QOI, your chance of developing resistance is generally pretty low. But there's something you got to keep in mind. When you're making that summer patch application at 18 degrees, your anthracnose pathogen, especially if you got POA, can be active pretty much almost throughout the entire season. So in your mind, you're like, you know what? I've just made a patch application. You got to keep in mind, though, if your other disease that's noteworthy in your golf course being anthracnose, it would have come into contact and imbibed some of that fungicide. And you can see the risk of developing resistance is high. So as you transition from your spring patch prevention program to your in-summer anthracnose program, keep in mind, you know what? I've already done one QOI app. Risk of developing resistance is really high. I better make sure I rotate for my next application. Things to keep in mind, the unintended potential consequences of making an application. All right, so why rotate? We're losing iprodion, so that's causing the resistance risk to go up. That results in higher pressure on the remaining fungicide groups. Unfortunately, for now, there's fewer new FRAC groups coming to market. And what does FRAC stand for? FRAC stands for Fungicide Resistance Action Committee, okay? And these things cost, these fungicides cost money, and I get it. You want to maximize the efficacy of your programs, and then you want to avoid those scenarios I talked about, cross-resistance and multiple resistance. So how do we manage for fungicide resistance? Don't use just one product or mode of action exclusively. You want to alternate your modes of action. Tank mix them if possible. Be great to put a systemic and a contact in the tank. And never make more than 2 sequential applications, okay? Check the label. You want to follow the maximum allowable use rates. Every label has that. And also follow label rates. Manufacturers spend a lot of time looking at different rates, and we've done that. So these label rates are there for a reason. And if you can, use a preventative program. So I know that I'm not accountable to a fungicide budget like you guys are, and these products cost money. So it's easy for me to say, and it also might sound counterintuitive, like, well, if you want me to use a preventative program, I'm using more fungicides. The reason why a preventative program is recommended, again, it comes down to that population management. When you're spraying preventatively, you're keeping that population low. Low fungal population equals less chance of a naturally occurring resistant isolate to form within that population. So if possible, avoid those curative rates. And then I know you guys are all doing your cultural control, so you're all maintaining the healthiest turf possible. And we put this frac sheet together a couple of years ago. So it's a completely Canadian frac sheet. If you're interested in getting a copy, please reach out to me and I'll send you one. But essentially, we put it together because we started getting a lot of phone calls from superintendents saying, I want to rotate. However, and we talk about it not a lot, but I'm not quite sure exactly how to do it. And when I go online to find information, everything's Americanized. I don't know what Torque, Balaton, Emerald, what is this stuff? So we put a Canadianized frac sheet together. So these are all Canadian names. The way it works is your fungicide groups are on the left-hand side. Here is the names of the fungicide groups, name of the products, the name of the active ingredients. We added Phytomobility section a couple of years ago. And again, just telling you what group it is. Everything that's highlighted in blue means it's a premix, meaning there's more than one active ingredient in the jug. So if I could use Trilogy as an example, which is a fantastic product from our friends at Bayer, but what this chart is telling you, I've just done an application with a group 2, 3, and 11. So if I want to do a true rotation with my next spray, I better not pick anything out of box 2, 3, and 11. Can I choose a group 7, an SDHI? Sure. However, keep in mind, some of these SDHIs are premixes also, and they contain one or more group. So if I were to use, let's say, Honor, which is a great product from our friends at BASF, however, it's got that group 11 in it. So if I were to go Trilogy followed by Honor, I've done back-to-back group 11s. So any of you who are interested in one of these sheets, please contact me. Now let's take a look at our portfolio, what we have that may be of use to you on your golf courses. So first of all, excuse me, very proud and happy to introduce Phosphorol Pro. So Phosphorol Pro is a unique phosphite fungicide, and it's the first and only phosphite fungicide registered for the suppression of microdochium patch. So we have microdochium patch, anthracnose, and Pythium blight on the label. These are, Phosphorol Pro is one of those true systemics, moves up and down in the plant. It does have a dual mode of action, meaning you do have a direct mode of action on the pathogen, but it also elicits systemic acquired resistance. It's a cost-effective alternative to traditional chemistries, and it's part of our emerging line of bio-priority products. So like I said, we're very proud that it's the first phosphite fungicide registered for microdochium patch suppression. So general info, it's a blend of 3 phosphite sources, so that is unique. You get a lot of that phosphite in the jug. Excuse me, 53.6% active ingredient. So it's actually, if you've ever picked up a case, very heavy. When we look at the label, we have anthracnose, suppression of anthracnose and Pythium, rate range of 130 to 260, and microdochium patch, 130 mils applied biweekly. And we had also clarified some of the wording on the label. It used to read sports turf, which now reads sports fields. So anyone manages sports fields can use this product. Work we did years ago actually to get anthracnose on the label. Did work with Vargas. Here is untreated 30% anthracnose. By going to the low label rate of phosphorol, you're able to cut that pressure in half. Going to the high label rate of phosphorol, able to cut that rate in half again. So not an eradicant, but a strong suppressant. So either tank mixed with Renovo, which I'll get into a second, or chlorothalonil, Daconil, get great control. But just want to show you some pictures from our microdocium patch research we did at Oregon State. And if you want to do any microdocium patch research, it's got to be done at Oregon State. They would be like the center of the universe for microdocium patch research. But applications made in October, going on through February, applied biweekly. Propiconazole was used as an industry standard to check, and evaluations made every 14 days. So here's the untreated, just to give you an idea of the pressure that we saw throughout that trial. And here's phosphoral, that phosphoral plot on the top. Here's propiconazole performing really well, 64 mils monthly. Now here's phosphoral at that 130 mil rate. So you're getting a bit of breakthrough again. So it's suppression, it's not control. If you look at all the pressure around the plot, just high disease pressure. And even looking at, this is from 2 years ago now, the research we did, that same phosphoral treatment. The pressure was extremely high in this trial, and some great suppression, a little bit of breakthrough, but overall, really, really happy. Excuse me. So that's Phosphoral Pro. Now, Renovo being the only FRAC 1, okay? It's a very systemic, broad spectrum fungicide. And interestingly enough, if you look at the spectrum of control of Renovo, it's very similar to iprodion. So Renovo the active ingredient is thiophanate methyl. Now, I just want to address the elephant in the room, or potentially the elephant in this virtual room. But, and to be fully honest, Renovo or thiophanate methyl was the first systemic product launched in Canada, or in the turf industry in the late 60s. So it's been around for a while, and there is some resistance out there. However, the amount of resistance out there is overestimated. Thiophanate methyl is prone to alkaline hydrolysis. We see work that was done at Rutgers by Bruce Clark years ago. You can see on dollar spot, if your pH, your pH, if the pH of your water solution was higher than 7, you start to get breakdown of the product and you lose efficacy, okay? So true resistance to thiophanate methyl is, like I mentioned, it's like spraying water. So if you've ever used thiophanate methyl in the past, let's say at a 14-day interval and only got 7-day control, that is not resistance. The very fact you got control lets you know you don't have resistance, okay? But it is prone to alkaline hydrolysis. So general information, thiophanate methyl, again, not to beat a horse to death here, but it is only group 1. So it would be of, interest to make sure that, this active can work for you. Just to give you an update on the regulatory status of Renovo, thiophanate methyl had been in reeval for 18 years, unbelievable. Finally came off a reeval last December, so it is now re-registered for 15 plus years, which is good news, because it would have been a shame to lose both a group 2 and a group 1 up here in Canada. However, and full disclosure, Renovo's probably got the worst label in the history of fungicide labels. Okay, I mean, look at this, very limited. And if you look at the American equivalent, 3330, it's called 3336, south of the border. It's a very broad label. However, the issue was when a product is in reeval, like Renovo was in reeval for 18 years, you're not allowed to make changes to the label. We get asked questions all the time. When are you going to get anthracnose? When are you get microdocium patch? When are you going to get take-all patch? When are you get summer patch on the label? But we couldn't make any changes to the label because we were in reeval. Now that it's off of reeval, we can proceed to add diseases to the label to make it a key active ingredient for you guys with some of the diseases that you deal with. Again, the good thing about Renovo, though, is that it is, if I could use the word, it's very dummy proof, if I'm allowed to use those words, because that every time you use it, it's the only group 1 fungicide in Canada. So you've done a true rotation. When we look at the Vincelli report, the 2020 Vincelli report, you can see how thiophanate methyl on pink snowmole microdocium patch is rated as high as iprodion. And then on dollar spot, getting a 4 out of 4 compared to other great industry standards. So whether as a standalone or rotational partner, or makes a great strong tank mix with Phosphoral Pro, our Phosphoral Pro product, or in south of the border, there's a premix. So there's a premix known as Spectro. If you Google Spectro, essentially it is chlorothalonil and thiophanate methyl in one jug. You could always tank mix thiophanate methyl with Daconil, would be a nice different option for you. Then we did some work, like I'd mentioned, with the sultant of snow mold, Dr. Paul Koch, at a couple locations. And in his Wausau location, he had 71% disease in his check plots, or the controls, and 100% of that disease was pink snow mold, okay? So just to show you some of the treatments we put in. So here was thiophanate methyl with another active ingredient, and that other active ingredient is a gray snow mold product only, has zero efficacy on pink. So all the heavy lifting here was done by the Renovo. And you can see compared to the plot, this is all pink. The Renovo, this was 6 ounces and this was 9 ounces. So they both worked. So, further work that we need to do is look at different rates and get Fusarium patch on the label for you. Also, anthracnose, we did work at with Dr. Joe Vargas. 42 mils of Renovo, 130 mils of Fosrol Pro, performed extremely well, give you a 98% control of anthracnose. So this is a full broad spectrum spray. You'd be getting dollar spot control, anthracnose, brown patch, Fusarium patch, Pythium blight. So complete rotational tank mix. We also have, with our distribution agreement I mentioned, we also have Disarm. You might have seen some of this marketing out there. Some general information, it's fluoxystrobin. It is a group 11, okay? It is one of those acropedal fungicides. So the two main, differentiators for Disarm. One is, it's just its quick uptake. It is rain fast in 15 minutes. And that is attributed to there's a fluorine atom that was added to their active ingredient, just makes it very systemic. So it gets into the plant within 15 minutes. You can see it's rain fast in 15 minutes. So point being here is, if you do have a plant that is diseased, you come in that morning, you see some active disease, and you want to get that medicine to the plant and inside the plant as soon as possible, this could potentially be a good option for you. And also, if you were to water this in to get this into the roots, if you're not using like 4 gallon nozzles, if you were to use, let's say, 2 gallons and put some post application irrigation down, make sure you water it in within 15 minutes is what I'm trying to say. Then just work that was done in the lab just to show the systemicity of the product. You can see 1 day after application, here's a leaf blade. Disarm was applied at the base here. You see the majority of the product right here. Then just 7 days later, it made its way to the tip of the leaf and also evenly distributed across the leaf margin. So you really get nice uniform protection across the entire leaf blade. When we look at the label against other industry standards, all QOIs, just a very good label, just like all these other products here. And then a second differentiator for Disarm is it is one of the only 2 strobies that have a dollar spot registration. So not that I'm positioning Disarm as a dollar spot product. However, if you use it, you can know that you're going to get some dollar spot control at the same time. It actually, the trials we did, it actually performed better on dollar spot than we thought. And just work that Bruce Clark did. So, years ago now, 2007, just on summer patch. So it can be used preventatively in the spring at 11.5 mils. Got great control of summer patch. And also on take all patch at 11.5 mils. This time work was done in Chicago. Excuse me, performed really well here. And also work was done with tebuconazole, which is a DMI. So, and a take all patch, a reason why you might want to use something like a DMI. And if there also was a question on your test as to, why a DMI fungicide would be effective against take all patch, is because those DMIs, they can enter leaves and move down through the plants to the roots. And they can also soak through the thatch where they come into, they encounter that growing fungi. When we look at the Vincelli report on anthracnose, it performed as well as these other great products here, all strobies. And then again, that a little bit of a differentiator for Disarm, having some pretty good efficacy on dollar spot. Then moving into Segway. So Segway is what, we like to call the standard in Pythium protection, very, very strong material on Pythium. Active is cyclophosphamide, so it is the only group 21 fungicide. We were fortunate, I was able to go down to Rutgers every year. Last year was the first year, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go due to the pandemic. However, we were able to go to Rutgers and see Bruce Clark's field trials, which are excellent, by the way. And every year we would see the Segway plots. So either Segway on its own or in a tank mix with something else. So they were always a top performer. But I'm not here to waste your time to talk about Pythium blight, but talk more about the root dysfunction, root rot. These are more pathogens we're starting to hear about more recently. And if you look at this picture, this is Pythium root rot, but it looks a lot like take-all patch. And interestingly enough, Pythium root rot will infect your plant at the same time the take-all patch pathogen is too. So when you're making, your patch prevention applications, you could always throw in some segue to cover yourself off for that Pythium root dysfunction. But if we look at the Vincelli report, rated as high as insignia here. And then Pythium root rot, looking at work, or I should say Jim Kearns. So Jim Kearns from North Carolina State will probably be recognized as the guru or the master on Pythium, and he will give segue cyclophosphamide top grade of 4 out of 4 for Pythium root rot. So that Pythium root dysfunction I showed you before affects just bent grass, but Pythium root rot affects both bent and POA. Excuse me. However, and the same thing, Pythium root rot can infect the plant at the same time that either your summer patch or take-all patch is affecting or infecting your plant. So you could always put some segue down to not control all potential root-borne pathogens. By far, the most frequently asked question I get regarding segue, is it preventative or is it curative? The answer is it's strong, both preventatively and curatively. So you can use it with confidence anytime. Then Kabuto, our dollar spot material. And we typically, when I talk about Kabuto, I compare it more to Cadence, because both of them are really just dollar spot materials. So general information, the active ingredient is isophytamide. It is an SDHI, belongs to that group 7. Up until that point, Kabuto was the second SDHI in Canada, and Cadence is a fantastic product from our friends at BASF, but it was known more as being a preventative fungicide, or having preventative properties, not really curative. And then we'd seen that we got a bit of curative properties out of isophytamide, Kabuto. So we just did trials a couple of years in a row. And so we saw that, either Kabuto on its own or applied in a tank mix did have some curative properties. So we call it weak curatives. I wouldn't let the dollar spot pathogen fester and explode and use Kabuto without putting something else in the tank. But if you get on top of it soon enough, it does have curative activity. Here's a picture I took the year of the dollar spot over here, 2015. Pressure was insane. But here's our 2-week rated Kabuto performing really well. And then what's brand new for us this year is finally have our 21 to 28 day registration. So label expansion. So our 21-day rate would be 22.2 mils. And our 28 day rate would be our 28.5 mil rate would be our 21 to 28 day interval. So the untreated on the left and treated on the right. Unfortunately, Kabuto does nothing for worm castings. And then Quicksilver, the boss of moss. Just general information, active is carfentrazone ethyl. It is a contact herbicide. I thought this kind of interesting to go over really quickly, just the way it works. It's a PPO inhibitor. I'm not even going to pretend to try to, or intend to try to pronounce that. But essentially the way that this herbicide works, it's like shooting a carfentrazone bullet through those cells. So you got 3 water balloons here. You shoot a carfentrazone bullet through it, and it causes the internal cell contents to leak out. So just bursts open like that. For those of you that do use some Quicksilver, just research that was done. The inclusion of an non-ionic surfactant, and these are very cost effective, did help to boost control. So highly recommend, if you do use Quicksilver, add a non-ionic surfactant. It's very cost effective and it helps control moss. Label rate being 1.46 to 4.9 mils. You can't make more than 4 applications at this rate. However, recent research kind of indicates that this half rate here, in some instances, seems to perform as well as this rate here. So if you're applying at this rate, you can now make 8 applications instead of 4. We're starting to see some research. Some of the research now tends to indicate that Quicksilver might be working better at this lower rate applied more frequently. And again, make sure you add that non-ionic surfactant. All right, so just wrapping up here. There's a little coming soon. Again, unfortunately, we're losing Trilogy, and we're losing, we're losing the Iprodion fungicides this year. And so we've been hard at work with our own snow mold solution. So work we did with Paul Koch in 2019, 2020. Here he had 87.5% disease in his untreated. 30% of that disease was pink snow mold, and 70% was gray snow mold. And there was over 80 treatments, excuse me, in his trial. And 16, so in his report, he noted that 16 treatments averaged less than 5% disease, which is an exceptional performance given the high disease pressure. So there's about 150 days of snow cover. So very happy to report, our snow mold solutions. Here's a 2-way and a 3-way, but performing, very well, very happy, as you can see, complete annihilation here. So perform really well. And so, yeah, more to come on that, but we did some work ourselves. So here's in the Edmonton area, application made in October, evaluated 181 days after application. So the pressure was high here, and really happy to report that the product performed very well. Saskatchewan, still snow in the plot. You can see the pressure we had at this site here. Again, applied in October, evaluated in March, so 165 days after application, performed really well. And then really close to home to you guys, both our 2-way and our 3-way, pressure wasn't quite as high here, but you could see that it had performed well. And this was 173 days after application. All right, so just wrapping up, we've been supporting the Canadian industry, the turf industry, since 1995, either as Engage or, now as Belsham. And, we provide in-field technical support. Here locally, we host as many assistant superintendent meetings as we can. Every time that we're asked to sponsor either a regional or a national or any kind of industry event, we never say no. We always say yes. We support universities through trials. We do lots of in-field demo work just to further our own knowledge of our products and to share that with you. And the previous owner of Engage at the time had made an anonymous donation, which is now no longer anonymous, but to the new GTI. So, for years when we really just had 4 products, we were proud. We felt that we were supporting, the Canadian industry pretty well considering the size of our portfolio. And then lastly, how is Belsham different? Our North American headquarters is here in Canada. So we think about Canada first. It's always what solutions can we bring to Canada? We don't think about the US market first. It's no, we want to bring something to Canada. We're smaller, we're a little bit more flexible. We can look at solutions that maybe other companies can't look at that we can bring here. So potentially more solutions for Canadian superintendents. And we do have a network of over 40 global partners. So we're in constant contact, looking at potentially bringing over new solutions. And then, just like our friends at Syngenta, we have, boots on the ground. And this is something we take pride in. Not every company invests in the country and has boots on the ground. So with that, I'd really like to thank Even Spray for the opportunity today. Like I said, I've been waiting a year to be with you all. So very happy for the invitation. And I'd like to thank you. If you are on Twitter, please give us a follow at Belsham Turf. Other than that, this is my name or my nickname, Grover, as you can see here on the screen, my email address and my cell phone. My phone is on 24/7. You can contact me anytime. And with that, thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thanks so much, Paul. As always, love listening to you talk and hear all the great information you bring forward. So I appreciate you coming out, or not coming out, coming online.
No problem.
Soon we'll be coming out. Anybody have questions for Paul? We got nobody coming in after. So if there's any questions, either fire it in the chat or unmute yourselves. Well, that's generally a sign of a well-delivered presentation. Information was taken, received, and understood. I just have a couple cleanup questions. I have 4 people. I don't know who they are. One of them's Kim Warburton, Scott L., or Joaquim's dad. So if any of you are online still and want to get points, I just need to know your name. I don't have anything to correlate. So just either unmute or send an email to info@evenspray.com, letting them know that you were on and that's who you were, so we can make sure you get your points. Otherwise, don't worry about it if you're not concerned about that. Thanks again, Paul. You be well out there. Everybody else, snow's gone now. You're starting to see some turf, so we wish you all the very best for the coming season. Let's hope the tills keep ringing and you guys get all the resources you need to keep your turf as healthy and vibrant as possible, and move on. And always remember, through these times, it's going to be busy. It's going to be busy early, but take care of yourself as well as you take care of your turf, because that's important during these stressful and times when we can't do our normal things. Make sure you take care of yourself and your family. So
Thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it, folks. Thanks, Jay.
be well. Have a great day. Talk to
You
you soon,
too.
Paul.
Yeah,
Take
bye.
care.